He spent 18 months filing complaints against my flower farm until the county shut me down. 2.5 years after that, his house went to foreclosure auction, and when the gavel came down, my grandmother's name was on the winning bid. I was standing in the parking lot of the Shenandoah County Courthouse when the confirmation arrived on my phone, and the first thing I did was stand very still for about 30 seconds, looking at nothing in particular. The second thing I did was think about lavender, specifically the color of my grandmother's lavender rose in late June, that particular silvery purple that only exists in the hour before sunrise, when the dew is still on the leaves and the whole farm smells like something between a memory and a prayer. I hadn't set foot on that land in nearly 3 years. Not since the county posted a suspension notice on my greenhouse door and told me my operating permits were under review. My name is Camille Forsyth. This is the story of how I lost the thing my grandmother spent her life building, how I lost it because of a man who moved in next door and decided I was inconveniently in his way, and how I eventually learned that patience is not the same thing as surrender. My grandmother, Ida Forsyth, bought those 2.5 acres in the Shenandoah Valley in 1974 with money she had saved working double shifts at the textile mill in Waynesboro, Virginia. She was 29 years old and she didn't know the first thing about farming flowers, but she knew she wanted land, and she was stubborn enough about it that she figured the rest out as she went. She learned from books she checked out of the county library, from a retired farmer named Mr. Hensley, 3 roads over, who lent her his rototiller and answered her questions without making her feel ignorant for asking, and from trial and error across more planting seasons than I can count. She planted her first dahlia tubers the spring I was born. By the time I was old enough to walk the rows without crushing anything, she had a working operation. A U-pick garden open on weekends from May through October, a wholesale account with 2 local florists in Woodstock, and a small greenhouse she had built herself using salvaged glass panels from a restaurant remodel and a construction manual she had borrowed from the library so many times that she finally just bought her own copy. She was not a sentimental woman, my grandmother. She didn't romanticize the work or the land. She loved it practically, the way you love something built with your own hands and your own time and your actual money. When she passed, she left me the property, the equipment, a mortgage she had nearly paid off, and a spiral notebook of planting records and soil pH notes dating back to 1979. She also left me her stubbornness, which I have come to believe was the most valuable thing in the estate. For 6 years after I took over, I ran the farm the way she had built it to run, and then I pushed it a little further. I expanded the U-pick into a proper farm stand, launched a cut flower subscription service running April through November, and signed seasonal florals contracts with 4 wedding coordinators across the region. At our busiest, I had 4 part-time employees who knew the farm well enough to work without constant direction. The one I leaned on most was Ruth Ann, who had been with my grandmother since 2009. Ruth Ann could read a plant the way other people read faces. She could walk a row of dahlias in early summer and tell you, within a reasonable margin, exactly which colors would open when, and she was almost never wrong. That knowledge lives in a person's hands after years of paying close attention, and it is not the kind of thing you can replace quickly or at all. On the business side, I had built something I was genuinely proud of. Good accounts, a loyal subscription base, a reputation among wedding vendors in the Northern Valley for reliability and quality. The mortgage was nearly gone. The farm was not making me wealthy, but it was making me whole, and for a long time I believed that was enough to protect it. A man named Corbin Aldrich bought the property next door in early October 3 years ago. He arrived on a Tuesday with a moving truck and a manner I can only describe as proprietary. The posture of someone who has already decided, privately, that their presence improves whatever room they enter. Within a week of moving in, a landscaping crew appeared along our shared fence line and removed the old hedgerow that had stood there since my grandmother's time. They replaced it with a 6-foot cedar privacy fence that went up in a single afternoon. I watched from the greenhouse and told myself it was his land and his choice and none of my business. I baked a small loaf of honey wheat bread and brought it over the following Saturday morning, the way my grandmother always welcomed new people on our road. He answered the door in pressed khakis and a quilted vest, and received the bread with the particular politeness of someone who considers gratitude a formality. Before I turned to leave, he mentioned that he had some concerns about the irrigation ditch along our shared northern boundary, and hoped we could find a time to discuss it properly. I said, of course. I meant it. He never came to me with those concerns. 6 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the Shenandoah County Department of Public Works informing me that a complaint had been filed by an adjacent property owner regarding agricultural drainage from my land affecting a shared easement. I was required to submit documentation of my irrigation system specifications and water management plan within 30 days. That was the first complaint. Over the following 18 months, there were 14 more. A noise complaint about my irrigation pump, which ran on an automated timer beginning at 5 in the morning. The same pump, in the same location that had been running on the same schedule since my grandmother installed it in 2011, without a single objection in 12 years. A complaint to the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, alleging that my farm stand was operating as a food service establishment without a handling permit. An inspector came out and confirmed what anyone could see. I sell flowers, not food, but the inspection still cost me 2 working days during the busiest week of tulip season and nearly $200 in inspection fees. A formal written complaint about the height of my roadside directional sign, which was allegedly 1.3 inches over the allowable maximum under a county ordinance my attorney confirmed had not been enforced in the valley since 2009. A formal written objection submitted during the public comment window for my agritourism license renewal, alleging that my UPIC operation functioned as a ticketed commercial event venue, and therefore required a separate county commercial use permit under a section of the zoning code that had, to my attorney's knowledge, never been applied to a working farm in the county. Responding to that single objection cost me $900 in legal fees and delayed my renewal by 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which I was technically operating on an expired provisional registration, which he also filed a complaint about separately. Each complaint on its own was a nuisance. Strung together across 18 months, they were something more deliberate than that. I asked around. I tried to understand what I had done, or what he believed I had done, or what he actually wanted. My neighbor, Bet, who had lived on our road for 40 years and had the institutional memory of a county archivist, told me quietly over her back fence one morning that she had seen Corbin Aldrich at the county planning office at least 3 times before he filed the first complaint against me. She didn't know exactly what he was inquiring about. She knew the timing. A few months later, she had found out more. She was thorough, Bet, in the way people become when they have lived somewhere long enough to understand that what happens on a road affects everyone on it. What she had pieced together from public records and a clerk who appreciated a patient listener was this. Corbin Aldrich had purchased the property next to mine as part of a broader real estate investment arrangement involving 2 other investors. The goal, as best as anyone could reconstruct it, was to acquire several adjacent agricultural parcels in our stretch of the valley and petition the county for a rezoning classification that would allow residential subdivision development. He had approached at least 2 other landowners before he bought next door. Bet herself was one of them. She told me he had come to her door with what she described as an unnervingly thorough packet of materials, and she had told him she hadn't kept that land in the family for 53 years to watch someone turn it into a cul-de-sac. The other landowner had given him a similarly polite refusal. He bought next door instead, and then he started making my property harder to keep. I think about the shape of that decision sometimes. He did not file 15 complaints because I was doing anything wrong. He filed them because I was in the way of something he wanted, and I was not inclined to move, and so he set out to create conditions that would make the land feel like more trouble than it was worth. The complaint that finally did the damage was the most administrative of all of them. My agritourism license renewal application for the current operating year had been submitted by my attorney in March, on time, with certified mail documentation. The county administrator's office had received it. What they had not done was log it into their processing queue, because it had been routed to a department that was understaffed and working through a significant backlog. The application sat untouched for 9 weeks. When my attorney made a follow-up call in May and discovered the delay, the administrator apologized and said they would expedite processing. Corbin Aldrich filed a formal enforcement complaint the same week the backlog was discovered, before the county had time to correct the error. He alleged that I was currently operating a licensed agritourism enterprise under a registration that had technically lapsed, and he requested that the county take enforcement action pending a compliance review. The county suspended my operating permits while the review was conducted. I got the notice on a Wednesday morning. I read it twice. Then I called my attorney, who read it and told me the review process would likely take 3 to 4 months, conservatively. I told her I could not survive 3 to 4 months with the farm closed. She said she would file for expedited review. She said there was no guarantee the county would grant it. They didn't. The review took 7 months. I did the arithmetic while I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table that evening. 7 months of mortgage payments on a property generating no revenue. 4 wedding contracts I would have to cancel, including 2 where florals had already been ordered and deposits had already cleared. A greenhouse full of plants that needed daily care to stay alive. Water, climate management, pest monitoring, with no operating income to justify the cost of running it. My employees, 4 people who depended on paychecks, whom I had no legal way to keep working. I let them go at the end of that week. I called each one individually because my grandmother would have been ashamed of me for doing it any other way. Ruth Ann listened to the whole thing without interrupting, the way she listened to most things, patient and still. When I finished, she said it wasn't over. She said it the way people say things when they need them very badly to be true. I told her I hoped she was right, and I had to look away from the window because I didn't have enough left in me that afternoon to say it convincingly. After the calls, I went into the greenhouse and stood in the middle of it for a while. I had started those seedlings in January. Ranunculus, Lysianthus, sweet peas in 6 colors, with the specific intention of selling them at the height of spring. They needed someone to tend them daily, and I had no way to sell them and no money to keep paying the utilities to keep them alive for months on end. I called the County Master Gardener Association and offered everything for free. They came on a Saturday with 2 vans. I stood by the greenhouse door and watched them carry it all out, flat by flat, tray by tray, things I had grown from seed over the course of a winter, and I kept my face as neutral as I could manage, because the alternative was not something I was willing to do in front of anyone. I thought about going to his fence line. I thought about it the way you think seriously about things when you are alone and depleted, and the reasonable options feel used up. My grandmother had a saying she repeated whenever she was dealing with someone who was deliberately making her life difficult, and she dealt with her share over 4 decades of running a business on her own. She said, "The one who waits with clean hands wins the room." I hadn't fully understood it as a child. I understood it now with a precision that felt almost physical. Going to his fence would cost me energy I needed. It would also give him something he could use. A story about an erratic neighbor, a woman who couldn't conduct herself in a professional dispute. I had watched how he operated. He filed things. He documented. I was not going to hand him anything to document. So I didn't react. I found other ground. The first 4 months, I covered the mortgage however I could. I took on freelance floral design work, corporate dinners, private parties, a pair of restaurant openings in Charlottesville that needed tablescapes for their launch weekends. I drove a great deal. I was tired in the specific, grinding way that accumulates when you are working hard without any forward motion, just staying in place. But I kept the mortgage current, which was the one thing I had to do. At month 5, I rented production space in a commercial greenhouse outside of Staunton from a retired grower who was winding his operation down and was glad to have someone using the facility instead of watching it sit empty. I started over from a small footprint, 12 varieties of specialty cut flowers, wholesale only. No retail, no farm stand, nothing that required a county agritourism license, or a public-facing address, or a sign on a road where someone could stand and watch me. Just a van, a price sheet, and a list of buyers I had built up over 6 years of knowing what people in this region actually needed. I named the new business Ida's Garden, after my grandmother. Not my name anywhere in the registration documents. Just hers. There was something I needed about that. The idea that what she had built might keep going under her name, even when what I was doing looked nothing like what she had started. Within 10 months, Ida's Garden was supplying flowers to 13 accounts. Florists, cafes, 2 boutique hotels in the Shenandoah region, a farm-to-table restaurant in Charlottesville that began ordering twice a week with the reliability of a utility bill, and a small event venue outside Harrisonburg that became my most consistent customer and eventually my most important reference when I started approaching wedding planners again. I hired a CPA named Josephine Pruitt to manage the books and help me structure everything properly. Josephine was precise and unflappable, and had the particular gift of making complex financial arrangements feel navigable, And after 18 months of feeling like the ground was dissolving under me, having someone like that in my corner was more stabilizing than I knew how to articulate. It was Josephine who mentioned it. We were in the middle of a quarterly review when she paused, set her pen down, and said, with the careful, information-only neutrality of a person who is reporting a fact and leaving the interpretation entirely to you, that a residential parcel had appeared on the county tax delinquency report that she thought I might want to know about. She gave me the parcel number. I looked it up while she was still sitting at my kitchen table. It was his property. I sat with that for almost 2 weeks before I asked Josephine to pull the full county record. What she found was this: 3 years of unpaid property taxes, a home equity line of credit that had gone into default, and a second mortgage that, based on the filing dates and the lender attached to it, appeared to be connected to the same real estate investment partnership that had been pursuing agricultural rezoning approvals from the county. Approvals the county planning board had denied, twice, over the previous 2.5 years. Whatever he had been building out here, whatever arrangement required my land or the absence of me from it, had not come together. The county had said no to the rezoning, the partnership had apparently collapsed, and in the process of trying to make my farm untenable, he had extended himself so far past what he could actually sustain that he could no longer pay his own property taxes. I read through the records 3 times, not with the satisfaction I might have expected. With something quieter, the particular feeling that arrives when you have been patient for a long time and the world finally demonstrates that the patience was correct. The foreclosure auction was held on a Thursday morning in the main hearing room of the county courthouse in Woodstock. Fluorescent lighting, folding chairs, a room where things that change people's lives happen without any particular ceremony at all. I registered to bid under Ida's Garden Holdings, LLC, Josephine's suggestion, so that no one in that room would connect the bidder's name to the farm next door until the transaction was complete and final. There were 6 registered bidders, 3 appeared. 2 dropped out in the early rounds. The last remaining bidder was a property acquisition firm out of Roanoke. We went back and forth across 4 rounds of bids. They stopped at $67,000. I bid $69,500. The auctioneer's gavel came down. I owned the property next to my grandmother's farm, the property that had belonged to the man who spent 18 months trying to make sure I couldn't keep mine. I drove there on a Saturday morning, 3 days after the deed transfer paperwork was filed. I want to be clear about why, because the easy version of this story is a satisfying one, and the true version is a little more complicated. I did not go to gloat. I went because I believed he deserved to hear it from me directly. Not from a county notice in his mailbox, not secondhand from someone on the road. My grandmother had a specific view about how you do hard things, facing forward. He opened the door already knowing. Word moves fast in a county this size. You think you've accomplished something, he said. His jaw was set and his arms were crossed, and he was working to sound like a man who still had the room. I'm not here to argue about what I've accomplished, I said. I came because you deserve to hear this from me personally. The transfer finalizes in 30 days. I'd use that time to make your arrangements. You have no idea what you've done to me, he said, and something shifted underneath the words. A kind of thinning, an edge that was no longer anger but something he didn't want me to see. This is my home. I know exactly what it feels like to lose one, I said. You made certain of that. He didn't answer that. I hadn't come expecting him to. I said what I had driven over to say, and I turned and walked back to my car and did not look back at the fence. The legal challenge he filed through his attorney went nowhere. Virginia tax foreclosures are nearly impossible to unwind once the transaction closes, and his attorney apparently told him as much within 10 days. I heard through Bet that he withdrew the challenge shortly after, and that some of the neighbors who had maintained a careful neutrality throughout the years of complaints, people who had probably told themselves there might be some legitimate basis to his grievances. Because it is easier to believe that than to believe your neighbor is simply predatory, became somewhat less careful about which side of the conversation they occupied once they understood the full sequence of events. I offered him 45 days to vacate instead of 30. I have been asked whether that was generous, and I don't think generosity is exactly the right word. It was what my grandmother would have required of me, and she had specific standards that I was not willing to let slide simply because the person on the other end of them had not extended me the same consideration. Ida's garden now operates out of both properties under a single consolidated agritourism license, covering the full combined acreage. The greenhouse we built on his old land is 3 times the size of the one he helped shut down. We run You-Pick weekends from late April through October, a cut flower subscription program, a small batch dried flower line that Ruth Ann developed almost entirely on her own initiative 2 winters ago because she had a hunch about the market and she was right. We also rent out the restored barn on the property for small private events, weddings, anniversary dinners, family gatherings, and we are booked a full calendar year in advance. I called Ruth Ann the morning the new operating license was approved. She picked up on the first ring, before I had finished explaining why I was calling, and said, "When do I start?" 3 of the other former employees came back as well. The 4th had found something she loved closer to her home, and I told her that was exactly right, and I genuinely meant it. Josephine manages the full financials now, both parcels, the consolidated license structure, the quarterly filings, the wholesale accounts, with the same precision she brought to my one-van operation in a rented greenhouse outside of Staunton, which feels simultaneously like a different lifetime and like something I would not trade for anything because of what I learned there about operating in the dark. I keep a copy of the auction confirmation in the top drawer of my desk in the farm office, not as a trophy, as a document of time, of what it cost to wait correctly instead of moving too quickly, of what 2 years can feel like when you are in them, and what they look like when they are behind you. The spring after we reopened, I planted 300 lavender starts along the boundary between the 2 properties, right along the line where his cedar fence used to stand. By June, the whole border was in bloom. Standing there in the early morning, in that particular light that belongs to the Shenandoah in late June, the smell of it was something I cannot describe to you, except to say that it was exactly what I remembered. And also better, and also something my grandmother would have recognized before she had even walked out the door. There are people who will spend months or years filing and complaining and chipping carefully at the edges of what you built, waiting for you to make a mistake or run out of resources, or simply decide that the fight is not worth what it costs. What they rarely account for is that while they are doing all of that, you are also doing something. You are getting quieter. You are getting more precise. You are learning to operate with less, and learning that you are more capable in the lean than you ever understood when things were easy. You are accumulating a kind of patience that looks, from the outside, like passivity, but is actually the most dangerous thing in the room. My grandmother knew that. She learned it in a textile mill in Waynesboro in her 20s, saving for land that nobody around her believed she could manage. She carried it through 40 planting seasons, through bad harvests and late frosts and difficult neighbors, and every other thing the valley sent her way over the decades. I am grateful she passed it on to me, and I am grateful I had enough of her stubbornness to hold on to it during the years when it was the only asset I had left. The lavender is coming up again now. All 300 plants, right where they belong.